Hey everybody, it's that Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com. Welcome to the lesson for this Sunday, June 25th. As you can see, I am way out in the country. I am in Hope, Arkansas. It is the 60th annual homecoming of my mom's home church, which is the Common Hill Baptist Church in Hope, Arkansas. So yes, I'm a little late recording. There's still people laughing on the church grounds and having a great time, but I didn't want to miss trying to get something uploaded because I know that we're preparing for Sunday school. I hope that you and your family are having as much fun as my family and I are this weekend. And yes, even at the homecoming, that includes Sunday school. So I hope that you're having Sunday school tomorrow. Well, no, excuse me, we'll be in Sunday school tomorrow. I am so honored that I get to teach Sunday school here tomorrow at the homecoming. So make sure that it's in your plan. If you're new around here, welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web, and I'm so excited that you're here. Like this video, give us a thumbs up if it's been valuable, but most of all, please share it with someone. Let's see, what I want you to know before I go into the lesson, the AIM Convention for the Church of God in Christ is coming up July 3rd through the 7th in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I hope that you're planning to be there with us. I am so excited about all of the great planning that is taking place by Bishop Alton E. Gatlin and the International Sunday School Department. The training is going to be incredible, and I am so honored to be facilitating the Millennials training and curriculum, as well as the Super Sunday School presenter, keynote presenter on that Friday. So please be there. It's going to be fantastic, and I am looking forward to seeing so many of you at the convention. Okay, first I'm going to check and make sure that I'm not like standing near ants because I feel like little bites, and then we're going to get into this lesson. Okay, so the truth is I am out here with no internet reception, and so I cannot look up the lesson on my handy dandy app, and I only brought one of my Sunday school books out here. So depending on your publisher, our lesson title is Samson or Samson's Call. Oh look, wait a minute, I got a little internet. The Bible basis is Judges chapter 13 verses 1 through 7, and it picks up again at 24 and 25. The Bible truth: God's leaders are called and prepared to do His will in many ways that may be challenging. Our memory verse is verse 5, and the lesson aim is that we will evaluate the details of Samson's birth and calling, empathize how the emotions Samson probably experienced regarding lifestyle restrictions imposed on him and others, and acknowledge that unforeseen circumstances prepare people for leadership roles today. All right, this is our final week in the book of Judges, and we are looking at another judge who is Samson. And when our lesson starts out, we start out just as we have for the last 3 weeks. We're still following the children of Israel who are in this cycle of sin. It's just what they do. They fall into periods of time when they are given to worshiping idols, and they fail God because they fall into patterns of pagan worship. And the lesson starts out with that they did evil again in the sight of the Lord. This again, it was just their cycle. So before, their enemy was the Midianites, and now in this week's lesson we see that their lesson is the Philistines, and they would be in the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. And the Philistines actually continue to be a problem as you look through their history. The Philistines, as we know, are a common and familiar group. We even saw them. They were a problem even in the time of David. But this time we're going to talk about Samson, and he's a familiar character to us from children's stories. We remember his long hair, his strength, that his hair was cut off, that he warred with the jawbone of an ass, and so familiar. But we're going to go back today and look at his very beginnings. And so the lesson tells us that he was the child of Manoah and Zorah. And his father was Zorah, his mother was Monah. Now, his mother was barren. She could not have children, and that was a tremendous embarrassment at that time. But the lesson tells us that something special happened, and it was a very special birth announcement, that after years of being disappointed and not being able to produce a child, that God was going to give her that thing that she desired, and that being a child. Now, birth announcements get very creative these days. If you follow your friends and relatives on social media, it's a really big deal to announce the birth of a baby. But how special, how much more special could a birth announcement be than an angel of the Lord dispatched to share that very news? Now, again, a barren woman who would bear a child, and we see barren women throughout the word. Elizabeth was barren, and actually an angel appeared to Zechariah to tell them that John the Baptist would be born. Hannah also had an angelic visit to tell her that she would have a son after a time of being barren. Rebecca was barren. Rachel was barren. One thing that you can note about barren women and barren situations concerning children is that even though they start in a very hurtful position, when they came out, when God decided that it was time or that he would allow them to have children, each one of them bore men who would go on to be very great and do very great works for God. And Samson's mother was no different. And so this angel comes and he talks to her and he makes it very clear to her that he doesn't even ask her what her problem is. She never has to open her mouth, but he makes it clear that God knows her issue. He doesn't beat around the bush, and God was going to give her a miracle. God knew her problem and he was going to give her a miracle. And that was one of the notes that I made, is that even before we open our mouths, there are times that God always knows what we need, even before we say anything. And there are times that people try to figure out things with us, but there's never a time that God doesn't know what we need. And in this case, her desire most of all was to have children. And God was going to give her this miracle. So Samson, by all definitions, is indeed a miracle child. Now, again, we talk about baby announcements and how exciting they are, and once we know that there's a baby on the way, like parents and extended community, we start making plans. We want to go buy clothing once we have had our gender reveals, and we're decorating nurseries, and parents are coming up with the perfect birthing plan. You know, will they be in a traditional hospital? Will they use a midwife or a doula? Will there be assistance with medication, or is mom going to do it naturally? And there are all these plans that we make, and then there are these dreams and hopes and aspirations that parents have for their children, and that's all a part of it. But one question I have is, do we seek God for what the will of God is concerning that child, even before that child gets here? In this case, this mother was told exactly how to prepare for her child. He was going to be wired differently, and there were things that she was going to have to do in his rearing to prepare him, because he was going to have a special job. So because he was very different, he would be reared in a very different manner. That manner would require him to live the Nazarite vow. So he was consecrated or dedicated. Numbers 6 verses 1 through 8 talks about that. But he was consecrated even before he was born to do something special. Even the way his mom carried him. Normally the Nazarite vow was taken by an individual, but in this case, because mom was carrying something so special, she too was under that vow during her pregnancy term, where there was no wine or fermented drink to be consumed, and she couldn't eat anything unclean. And the baby would live under that same requirement, and the additional thing is that he would never be able to cut his hair. No razor was to touch his head. So again, he was up. That was a bug. Again, he was dedicated from the womb. And there are times in our own lives when we go through periods of self-denial and things that we just aren't going to consume, or things that we won't participate in. I don't do insects. I may have to pause. Yes, the bug wants me. There are times that we have to give up things as a period of consecration unto God. And that's exactly the lifestyle that Samson was going to lead. Again, he would have a special job. He was going to be that leader, that deliverer who would deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Now note that the angel only speaks to the woman, and she tells her husband about the experience after the encounter, but she doesn't see the fullness of the experience, because she really only describes this person that she's had the encounter with as a man of God. She does not recognize that he was an angel, and she describes what happened and told her husband about this child, that he would be special, that he would be a Nazarite from the day of his birth to the day of his death. Now, note that the angel doesn't say the words in that way. The angel says things from the time of his birth, but his mother adds until the day of his death. And she also doesn't mention anything to her husband about Samson being a deliverer. She leaves that whole deliverer thing out. As you go on and read, you'll find that it is her husband who later figures out that it was indeed an angel of the Lord who gave this message, because he asked God, can you send that man back here again? We've got more things we need to know. And even his father wanted to know, what was God's will for this child? What would he do? What would be his purpose? And he had more questions. And so that's where, when I told you earlier about seeking God's will for children, even before they're born, there are questions that we should ask. There are other leadership lessons that I also saw in this lesson. So Samson was a little bit different than the other judges. Other judges were raised up and people followed them. But Samson was a single man who single-handedly destroyed the Philistines when no group of people actually followed him. And if you also look at the mathematics of the timing, the children of Israel were in the hands of the Philistines about 40 years. And we know that it was about 20 years that Samson was engaged with them during that time of their captivity. So he would have been around 19 or 20. He was a millennial when he launched into this very great thing that God had called him to do. Here are some other key learnings that I had from this week. First, living a life of sin continually puts us in bondage. And we've seen week after week after week that every time the children of Israel gave into their own ways and their own thoughts and their own ideas, they ended up in bondage. And that the same is so true in our lives. When we put ourselves in patterns of sin, we find ourselves in places that we never intended to be. I hear it said often that sin will take you places that you didn't intend to go and keep you longer than you thought you would stay. So sin is a very dangerous cycle to live in, to take for granted the blessings of God. I think I said last week that it is not possible to have our cake and eat it too, to live in the ways that we want to live and expect God's blessing to always be there for us. The next thing is that, again, God already knows the desires of our hearts. Before we open our mouths, He knows the desire of our hearts. The other thing that leaps off the pages to me this week as well is the encouragement to women who don't have children. And there are all sorts of reasons that women don't have children. There are women who have physical challenges in conceiving children, and that's a really tough place, especially when you have women who desperately want children. And so this week, I do pray for women who desire children, who for whatever those reasons may be, you have not been able to conceive, that it is God who decides when wombs are open and shut. It's God who decides when children will and will not be born, no matter how long you've been married, no matter how long you've had the desire. I pray for you this week, and I know that there is nothing impossible for God, and that all of that timing is in His hand. And then I also thought about women like myself who have never been married, who honestly thought that we would have children. And the encouragement for me personally is, number one, it doesn't bear anything. It doesn't make us less than women because we haven't had children. It doesn't take away our ability to be impactful and effective in the lives of other children. And so I encourage you to do some of the things that I do. And there are so many ways that I'm allowed to be a part of children's lives in my own world, be that nieces and nephews or godchildren, or even just finding ways that you can become a mentor. There are meaningful ways that we can contribute. And then there are women who just don't have children, and that's your choice. And I celebrate your choice if that's your choice. But again, I affirm that choice in you, knowing that there, this stigma that's attached to not having children or reaching a certain age and, getting to an event and people say, well, what's wrong or why don't you have children? It's your choice, and I affirm that choice in you. There's an age-old question that asks, is it nature or is it nurture that decides how that child is going to turn out? And in this lesson, I think we see that there is a balance of both. By nature, by design, Samson was who he was, and God had a destiny on his life from the very beginning. But also, God was very specific as to how that child was to be nurtured so that he could come into the fullness that God had designed for him. And so I say as well that it is both. It is both nature and nurture. But we cannot minimize how important nurturing children is. If you look at that Nazarite vow, it was about being consecrated. And I know that as a child, there were just certain things that I couldn't do. There were homes that I couldn't spend the night in. There were events that I didn't go to. And we have to be as protective of our children today that we just don't allow them to do everything, because every child has purpose and destiny. And it is up to us to protect that purpose and that destiny that is in our children. It is up to us to shield them from environments, from things that they should not experience, and most of all, to know. I knew as a child that I was different. I knew that God had something for me to do, but I knew that I was always even handled differently. And when we help our children to understand that We are not to be like the world. We can't participate in everything and consume everything and take everything into our ear gates and our eye gates. It's important when we think about what it is and how that's a part of developing what it is God has called us to do. That's it for the lesson this week. Most of the folks have left me out here. There's like 3 cars here, but it's been fun. It's so peaceful out here too. I could stay here for a while, but there's another event tonight, so I'm going to finish up here. And yeah, I'll be uploaded shortly as soon as I get back to the city, civilization, internet connection. That's it. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. I look forward to any comments down below that you may have gotten from, or nuggets that you would have gotten from the lesson, or comments that you want to share. That's it for me. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in Sunday school. Bye-bye, everybody.